Blog Talk Radio.
There's a mystery lurking the forested areas of the world. Many have seen something, but what is it? Are they seeing known animals? They claim they walk upright, like a human. There are so many eyewitnesses. Can they all be wrong? Is someone just playing a trick on people? Or is it possible a large bipedal being could exist in the forests of the world? You have a decision to make. Do you believe it exists? These are the topics we discuss on Sasquatch Watch Radio. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Sasquatch Watch Radio. Today is June 4th, 2013, and what a show we got for you tonight. Before we get to our guest, I want to welcome my great co-host, the Creature Seeker. How are you doing tonight, Bruce?
I'm doing great, Billy. How are you doing? I
am doing just fine. All I know is the weather was a whole lot more hospitable with me today since it's only in the 80s.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool for your area, isn't it?
Yeah, because we've been up in the 90s, and that was just a little bit too warm. So it's a whole lot more friendlier today. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get our guest on the show. First of all, I'd like to thank him for agreeing to be on the show tonight. I'm sure everybody enjoyed him last week, America's Book of Secrets. He was one of the guests there on the show. Did a great job. So everyone, Bill?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. I'm sorry.
Billy, it sounds like you're going underwater.
No, I wouldn't doubt it. It's probably another blog talk issue. But you can go ahead and Will. Thanks for being on the show tonight, and how about telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks for having me on, fellas. Well, let's see, a little bit about me. I've been involved with the Sasquatch subject now for over 40 years. I found footprints the first time when I was 14, back in 1972, and actually saw two of the creatures 2 years later. And subsequently, because of those sightings, met Renee DeHinnon, John Green, people like that, and sort of went from there.
Very good, very good. Creature Seeker, am I still coming in clear, or am I still breaking up?
No, you're clear now, Billy.
Okay, very good. All right, Bruce, I'll let you go ahead and ask some questions and get Will some stuff going.
Well, sorry if I'm jumping the gun here, Will, but I was talking to Billy earlier, and I looked at your blog, and you have that form on your blog about the government and what to do if they encounter a Yeti. Can you explain a little bit about that, why you posted that?
Well, it was just what I put on the blog is just little pieces of information that are interesting. It's something that I'm going to add to my a chapter to the new book I'm working on. That chapter deals with government cover-ups, or what I have been receiving from people telling me about cover-ups. And what that form is, that form was released by the, I'm drawing a blank here. It was released by the government. It was a communique from a foreign office in Nepal in 1959, and are answers to questions that someone in the State Department was asking about the Yeti. And by the questions or the answers, apparently someone was trying to find out, what if teams went in looking for these things and found them, how it was to be handled, who got what, cost, all those sorts of things. So back in 1959, somebody high up in government was very interested in this subject.
Yeah, I've always found that very interesting. I know that I don't think that I heard you say it, but I know on the show, the America's Book of Secrets, I believe it was Mr. Coles that had mentioned that one of the reasons or one of the theories out there as to why they believe the government would cover this up would be for the logging industry. Do you agree with that assessment, or do you have other theories?
Well, that's part of it. And when I was discussing with the producers of the show that issue, what I brought up was the fact that if you follow the money on any issue, I mean, a lot of people said, well, it could be religious, it could be this, could be that. And those arguments really don't hold up well. I mean, they're kind of the surface thing that first comes to mind, but, religious institutes and so on have held up pretty well with a lot of different subjects that have come up. So if you really want to find out if the government's involved in something, find out what the financial impact is going to be. And if you look back at the spotted owl thing back in the early 90s, and I'm from the Mount Rainier area of Washington State, and a lot of those communities that I was very familiar with growing up were logging communities. The finances that ran those communities were from the logging industry. And when the spotted owl business took hold, it really killed the industry and the income of those communities, and they never recovered. So I have to wonder sometimes if that wasn't sort of a test project to see, what the impact would be on communities should something as dramatic as the Sasquatch being proven to be real, what the effect would be on communities throughout the entire, not just the West Coast, but everywhere Sasquatches are seen. And if something like a bird had that big of an impact, what would an indigenous primate have?
Right.
Will, one of my friends is he's a sort of a wildlife naturalist, and so he loves the outdoors, and he loves wildlife, and he loves studying it. But he contends that the Endangered Species Act is probably one of the most harmful pieces of legislation in terms of getting people to come forward with their sightings or their discoveries, because that legislation just basically will shut down a whole operation. And so
and not just businesses, but they're set up where, depending on now, if the Sasquatch is proven tomorrow, the first thing they do is set up a community of scientists and all the different people that would be involved in its habitat to determine what that creature needs. And if they determine that it needs, X amount of millions of acres, they could not only take national forest land, they could take state land, they could take even privately owned forest land. So the impact is huge.
Wow. Yeah, that could be huge, that's for sure. I was going to mention that Bruce and I and a few others had visited the Mount Rainier area back a few years back. That area is just amazing.
It's a big area, isn't it?
It's very awe-inspiring.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it looks like, I think we mentioned several times when we were there that it looks kind of like Jurassic Park. I mean, just some of the mature trees and just the look of the forest.
And a lot of it's been logged. When I grew up in the 60s and 70s, there was still a lot of the older timber in that region. Yeah,
it's just an amazing area. Looks like we already have a caller. Will, I'm going to get them on the line and see if they would like to ask you a question. Caller from the 702 area code. You're on the air. Caller from 702. All right. Well, maybe they're just listening in. They must just be listening in. Okay. Bruce, you got any more questions before I start looking in the chat room to see if anybody's got questions in there?
Well, it seems like Will's got a lot of experience out there. That is some pretty rugged terrain out there in the Pacific Northwest. And so my question to Will is, how would you prepare someone to do research out there for an extended stay? What would your recommendation be in terms of health and supplies and basically, any tips you could give us?
Well, one of the things, and I don't want to talk too much about it, I don't want to kind of give away my own fire, is my new book that I'm putting together right now, I'm going to be talking about ranges and what Sasquatches do in those ranges, and I'm the only one that knows what they do. And I think it's going to really change how people look at the subject, because individual groups occupy such a large space, and it's much larger than most people think. And it's one of the reasons why researchers fail at what they do, because they don't know what their patterns are. They don't know how big an area they occupy and what they're doing and how they move through those areas. So I'm going to be publishing that information this year. So it's really tough to go into it. I mean, unless people really know what their patterns are and why they're doing what they're doing. Unless it's just blind luck, you're not going to find them.
Well, that's a lot of forest out there, Will. So
it's a lot of forest, yeah.
So a lot of people just kind of say, oh, well, this area looks squatchy. Let's go hang out in it for a while. And it seems like there's got to be a better way.
And there is, and they do follow certain patterns, and I did publish some of the markings, the territorial markings they do. Mm-hmm. And again, I'll be putting that in the new book with charts showing. I'm going to highlight 3 range areas up and down the coast to show people what the ranges look like, how big they are, and each one is a little bit different. But in each range, and a range could be, and usually is hundreds and hundreds of square miles, and is usually only occupied by 4 to 6 individuals. And you compound that with the fact that, and my belief is that they view humans as a predator, or a dangerous animal at the very least, and that's the reason they stay away from us. And I know a lot of people believe this stuff they see on TV with wood knocking, and I'm not going to say it isn't real, but I have yet to have anybody prove to me that it's real. And and the reason I say that is because if something views us as dangerous, they're not going to give away the location by doing something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to think about it in common sense terms, and it's just, and not to mention, I know the guy who kind of invented that back in 1991. I was with him when he came up with it, but a lot of people grasp that. I think it's because there's so many intangibles with this subject. It's so difficult because of the size of the areas, and it's a few and far between when you make good finds. So people get frustrated, and I think they want to latch onto the first thing that anybody can do. And when this stuff got put out, and it's only been out for the last couple of years, if you look back in the history of the subject, this stuff didn't exist beyond that. So, like I said, I won't say it isn't real, but I have yet to have anybody prove to me it's real. I mean, whenever you see this stuff on television, nobody ever goes back in the daytime and collects footprints or any solid proof that something really was there.
Right.
I'm sort of I guess maybe I have that little bit of Missouri in me. You have to show me. You have to prove to me that if you're saying something, I want to see it.
Yeah, and I've told people here, especially over the past year or so, I'm my own worst skeptic. You hear things in the forest. You see things. I have seen strange things, but I still cannot bring myself to say that I saw Bigfoot.
Yeah, when I'm in the field, I'll find something that's interesting, and I'll go to great lengths to prove it's some other type of animal or some other reason it was made before I come up with Bigfoot. That is the very last thing I'll say.
Right.
And, you know, even with footprints, one of the things I'm going to do with the book also, the new book, is I'm going to do a chapter on tracking. And I'm going to show people how to tell the difference between something that's been faked and what a real print looks like. There's some very interesting characteristics people can look for to tell if something was faked. I mean, unless it's like the Patterson film where, you know, we see the creature walking on leaving footprints. You know, if you find footprints, you can't say for 100% certain those were made by a Bigfoot because you didn't see the animal make it. And I maybe I'm going to the, you know, the nth degree on that, but my old friend Renee DeHinden used to say, you know, we're on the cutting edge, you know, for what the public consumes on this stuff, and if we're not the most careful with it, you know, it's a very important subject, then it looks foolish, and we look foolish.
You know, well, Renee was a interesting character. How did you meet him, and what is your recollection of Renee DeHinden?
Well, Renee and I were good friends for 25 years. I met him, I guess I should back up, maybe tell, for those who haven't heard about my first encounter with two Sasquatches. After we'd found footprints in the snow when we were 14, we looked every weekend for these things out in the woods, never saw another thing, so we kind of forgot about it. And in the fall of 1974, my dog was tied to his doghouse, going crazy right before dark, so I thought, well, maybe there's, you know, a raccoon or skunk or something. My dad used to say, shoot anything that comes in the yard because they might be rabid. So I grabbed a .22 and a couple bullets, and I let the dog go, told him to go get him, and he shot like a bullet out to the tree line. I had that dog for 13 years. He was a collie, never backed down from anything. He stopped at the tree line, froze. And as I got up to where he was standing, he turned around and flew past me back to the house. And he jumped up on the porch and sat there and shivered. And I thought, what the heck is he doing? You know, so I walked up to the tree line, and I could hear something moving in there. So I chambered around thinking, well, maybe, you know, it was a porcupine or something he was afraid of in there. So I had my rifle in my right hand, and I pushed the low-hanging tree limbs out of the way with my left, and I walked into the clearing. And here's this enormous thing standing there, moving leaves around with its right foot. And having grown up on a farm, butchering with my dad and hunting and stuff, I knew pretty well what animals weighed. And this thing was around 8 feet tall and at least 800 pounds. Wow. And I was in shock. I was only 15 feet away from it. And when it saw me, it stopped moving and just glared at me. And that just, you know, makes your blood turn to ice, that kind of a look. And I thought, oh, my God, what is this? You know, then it struck me. I thought, oh, that's one of the things that made the footprints. And I thought, geez, I have a .22. What am I going to do to this thing? So I thought, well, I'll shoot in the air and see, and maybe it'll scare it away or something. So I shot up in the air, and I heard a noise from slightly behind me to my right. And here comes another one walking out from behind some brush. And it walks over and stands next to the first one. And it's about a head shorter and a couple 100 pounds lighter, and it had the same look on its face. It was just, you know, they were not happy that I was there. So I took off running. Called my buddies. We tracked it at first light the next morning, these two sets of tracks in the frost until the sun melted the trail. And I didn't say anything because when we found footprints 2 years before, our families made fun of us for it. So we talked amongst ourselves, but nobody else. And my buddy John Adams and I were talking on the school bus after this event. And another of our friends overheard us, and he says, well, can I interview you about what you saw? And I thought, well, you know, he's kind of a shy guy and not too many friends, so I thought, well, it won't go anywhere. I'll go ahead and tell him. So I told him, and then he gave me John Green's 3 books that he published. And I thought, wow, I never knew there was so much stuff on this subject. So I got to know everything in those books and the people that were in them. And later that summer in 1975, I was kind of napping in the middle of July in my room, and one of my sisters came in and said, hey, there's 2 men here to see you. And I wake up, you know, kind of with one eye open, and I'm thinking, 2 men? I don't know any men except my uncles and my dad's friends. So I slipped on my barn boots, and I go walking out the back porch, and here's Renee DeHinden standing there. and I instantly recognized him from his pictures in Green's book. So he introduced himself, and the gentleman with him was named Dennis Gates, and they were investigating the Puyallup Screamer events that were going on just a few miles north of our home in Puyallup, Washington. And
what year was that, Will?
What's that?
What year was that?
That was in 1975.
Okay.
So we talked for a bit. He asked me about the things I saw. Then he invited me to their camp to meet Green and a few other people that were there. So I said, sure, I'll come up there. And so me and a friend went up there later that afternoon and spent a few days with him and Green, and there were some local men there and a state patrolman by the name of Mark Pittenger. And I hung around him, and I was impressed with the way he investigated. He took the night shift, and growing up, with the way my dad was, he was basically, be quiet and watch what I do very carefully, and you'll learn how to hunt this way. So I acted that way with Rene, and he was very impressed with me in the field. So when he got ready to leave, him and Green both liked me, and they exchanged phone numbers and even mailing addresses, and said to keep in touch. They wanted me to be their eyes and ears in that area. So my buddies and I decided to go out and look, and from that time on, and Dehinden always wrote letters and called, and we just hit it off as friends, even though there was quite a bit of an age difference. I was, all of 17, and I think he was about 40 at the time. But Rene didn't like too many people, and it wasn't so much for their views. It was just if they acted foolish, or he was very serious about the subject. In fact, he was the driving force that got anybody, Green, all the rest of them, even seriously looking at the subject. So, people have called John Green the father of the subject. It was really Rene Dehinden.
Yeah, every time I think of Rene, I think about another famous thing that he used to say all the time. I'm going to find out what's making those bleep, bleep prints.
I don't know where Rene learned how to speak English, but every other word was a swear word. And he was hilarious. That guy could tell the funniest stories. He would get groups of people together and tell stories, and they thought he was telling a real story, and he was pulling their leg. And he'd kind of give me I could see a little twinkle in his eye when he was going to pull a fast one on a group. I just kind of hold my mouth, because I knew what was coming. And he was just a fun guy to be around. I mean, and it was funny. You'd be in conversation with him, he'd be laughing and joking. And if something serious came across his mind, he could switch gears on a dime and just go serious into something. He was just an amazing guy. And I think people that didn't like him had a hard time with him because he didn't have a social filter. What was on his mind was what came out of his mouth.
That's for sure.
and the subject was so serious to him, it was of utmost importance that everything be credible and done correctly. So that's why people had problems with him, because if they did shoddy work, he was on them like,
sure.
bees on honey.
Yeah. Well, and it should be.
Yeah. Yep. I assume, Will, that you've heard of the Falcon Project.
Yes.
Are you any part of that? Do you just support that? Do you think it'll work? Or?
Well, I gotta give Jeff Meldrum and the guys who are putting that together credit for trying, but there's a couple of issues I have with it. Number one, it kind of shows that they don't really know where they're looking for things. It's sort of a shotgun approach. But I understand that at the level they're at working with this. I mean, being a Bigfoot hunter is sort of an evolutionary process, and it's much longer than most people think before you really, really get to know what you're doing with it. And they're at this level, and that's fine. They have to develop. But if you're going to go cover hundreds of miles with a camera, that's iffy at best. And then, what are you trying to do with it? You go in and you find tracks. Okay, that's fine if you're going to use the tracks for the right reasons. And a lot of people take tracks and cast, and they sort of hold them up as trophies and say, well, I'm important because I have all this. Well, to me, finding tracks helps you identify individuals and groups and where they are, what they're doing, those kinds of things. But and then there's another problem that they didn't bring out on the show, that they did have William Barnes on there, who's the head of the project, and I have a mutual friend of Mr. Barnes, and he sent me an email where the two of them were chatting back and forth, and Barnes said that the Forest Service was involved in that project. So again, it sort of raises the question, is there, what's the government doing being involved in a project like that?
Right.
I mean, it sort of raises some red flags in my mind.
Right. Bruce, did you see any other questions that I missed in the chat?
I don't see any other questions, Billy.
Okay. Yeah, I do have a private question that came to me from you squatching me. He says, ask Will if he believes in the Patterson video. He said, since Tom Biscardi has a doc of proving it not being true.
I've spoken with Bob Gimlin a few times, and for everybody, all the old timers, from DeHinden and Green on, said that Gimlin was probably the most honest person they've ever known, and I've spoken with Mrs. Patterson. I'm like Renee. Renee told me he believed the film was really. I asked him. I said, "Well, how come you, didn't keep going looking for Sasquatches after Patterson got the film?" And he says, "Well, because we had the proof." And he spent the next 20 years, he told me, trying to prove the film was fake. Now, Renee was an extremely good investigator. And what Mrs. Patterson told me over the course of numerous conversations really corroborated what Renee said about his investigations, that Patterson never really had any money. He didn't make any money off the film. Most of the time, she said that friends and family would give him $20 or $30 so he had gas money just to go looking. And Gimlin said that when he saw the creature, he was closer than Patterson, maybe 60 feet. He could see its tongue, its teeth. The hair color was actually lighter than what the film shows. Whatever the setting or lighting was with the lenses, created sort of a darker color. But he said it was a much lighter color, and he could clearly see the muscle movements under the fur. And he says, it was just, there was no way that it was anybody in a suit. And of course, Bill Munns, I don't know if you've seen his work with the Patterson film, but
oh, sure.
What's that?
So sure, yeah, he's done a lot of work with his modeling of the Patterson-Gimlin site.
Yeah, Bill did a great job when he shows how, in making a suit, you can have arm extensions and things like that, but when it comes to hip joints and knee joints, you can't modify those to make them longer. They have to fit the actor. And he said that when he showed where human joints are, they don't match up. So to me, that was a really great job showing that was not a human.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the film is real. I mean, it looks like I've seen 3 Sasquatches over my years, and it looks just like the things I saw. The only difference was the first two, their hair was just a little bit longer, but that could be variation in the species. So I wasn't too concerned with that difference. It wasn't enough of a difference to make me think it was something different.
Will, a common theme that I'm hearing from you is that you believe that the government is heavily involved in, well, let's just say more involved than the public is led to believe.
I don't really know what their involvement is. At this point, I'm hoping more people will send me information. Their experiences that they, and I've had lots of people send me things, everything from, being questioned about why they were in a certain area, where it was public access, where reports had come out of these areas, to full-blown involvement. So we don't know if it's state, if it's federal. Is there a concerted effort at the top? Is it just regional people kind of saying, well, we don't want this foolishness going on in our area of the forest, this part of the country, and maybe it's just that sort of a thing where they're trying to squash it. But I've been involved in 2 incidents where at least people in Forest Service uniforms did go destroy tracks.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, one near Mount Adams, Washington, one near Mount St. Helens. In fact, in the early mid-'90s, a couple of old-timers who were up scouting an area near Mount Adams were scouting the area for deer, prior to deer hunting season, and they came across some tracks. They went cross-country, and they came across these beautiful soil. In fact, I don't know if you recall on the show, there were a number of still photos on the show that were my photos. One of them was bear tracks in this really powdery, almost like flour soil. And I photographed those bear tracks on that same road where they found the Bigfoot tracks. By the time we got to the place where the Bigfoot tracks were, this Forest Service truck they had seen earlier, it was a water truck, had washed out all the tracks. And they ran into a Forest Service supervisor prior to that, prior to leaving the area, told him what they found. He said he was going to go in and document the tracks, grabbed, they said, an expensive-looking camera, went in there, and he even gave him a business card with his name and said, if you want copies of the pictures, get a hold of me. 2 weeks later, they tried. Nobody knew who this guy was. So, why did they destroy tracks and nobody knew who this person was? Pretty suspicious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Abe had a question in the chat room. He says, Does Will have a guess on Bigfoot's winter activities and where they may stay during that time?
Well, they like cold weather. I think they did very well during the Ice Age. They probably thrived. So all of my experience, every time I find tracks in the wintertime, they're going up in the snow.
Okay.
I think they winter high.
Now, do you think they shelter at all, like underground or anything like
that?
No.
They seem to enjoy the cold weather, and rain doesn't bother them.
Okay. Your turn, Bruce.
Well, I'm still interested about sort of just these weird government people who enter the scene on the periphery and then disappear without any trace, without any we don't have any idea who these people are, where they're from, which agency they represent, and what would be their motive, Will, for washing out those tracks?
Well, I think if it seems to me if more evidence, when evidence is found, like let's say what happened in the Bluff Creek area, generated a lot of interest, and really that decade from 1957 to 67, when Patterson got the film, really is what finally grabbed the world's attention on the subject. Because prior to that, this stuff has been around. There's been newspaper articles on these things for 200 years. They go way back in history. It's not something new, but they were sort of localized things. It never really caught on. But when events happened in the Bluff Creek area, that really grabbed the public's attention and imagination. And I think when that occurs in certain areas, it brings more attention, more investigation, more likely that something is going to be proved to be real. And I think they want to sort of keep that down. I have my theories about things like, we would go back to the wood knocking thing. Now if you were a government agency that wanted to keep this quiet, you get a group that goes around and they interview people, in groups, and sort of find out where things are going on. Then you go out there and make a whole bunch of noise and scare them away. So then your numbers of sightings go way down.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not pointing fingers, but there's a specific thing that happens like that today. And then, of course, it sort of fuels everyone else to go out and do these activities. And I think it kind of drives these things farther into the mountains, away from, where sightings are taking place. And I think if we had enough of a database currently with that going on today, we'd probably find the number of sightings are declining.
That's interesting. Just out of curiosity, especially since you were so close at the sighting that you had, I think you said, 15 feet?
About 15 feet, yeah.
In your opinion, since you had such a close-up sighting, in your opinion, do you think this thing's more ape or more human?
I don't think either one, really. I think they're a fossil hominid, sort of a leftover, because everybody sort of is made to believe that, and I think it's maybe the way it's presented, through scientific channels or TV shows or whatever, that, one upright walking ape-like creature, became another one, and then became another one, and became another one until we came along. And realistically, when you look at the fossil record, there were quite a few things that were living simultaneously, and not one leading to the other. And these things are probably one of those, or a remnant of one of those lines. And it isn't just one, there's actually 4 of them worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you know who Lloyd Pye is, but he has a really interesting theory, and it's not so much Bigfoot-wise, he uses that as part of his theory, but what sort of got my attention was he talked about the Australopithecine lines, and there were basically a couple of large species and a couple of smaller ones. And he said, and his idea is that if you look at the world today, the Sasquatch is the largest and least sophisticated. Then there's the Russian type, which I'm going to be covering in my book also. I'm putting a lot of interesting things in this new book. Then there's the Yeti, one of the smaller varieties, and one in South America. So it sort of fits what he's talking about. And these could be sort of leftover remnants of these other, upright walking ape-like lines. And these upright walking apes go back over 4 million years, so they're nothing new to science.
Right. Another question from Abe. He wants to know if you have any thoughts on a mating season, if there is one.
I don't really know. I don't think there's been enough information gathered to have a particular season. They might be like humans. It could be any time.
Okay. Go, Bruce. I know you got more questions.
Well, I just want to talk over anyone because, Will's so interesting. But I know that he's a pretty prolific writer, and he's got a couple of books out. I was wondering if he could just tell us about a couple of the books he's already written, and maybe a little bit about the one he's working on.
Well, the first one is Notes from the Field Tracking North America Sasquatch, and I never really wanted any sort of public attention, and especially working with Renee all those years and being a friend, and he really kind of took me under his wing and taught me a lot of stuff about how to look for Sasquatches. And with being around somebody like him, he was a real historical figure in every true sense of the word. So you always sort of feel that you don't ever want to try to walk over somebody like that. So I always was content to watch what he did and kind of help him. And after he died, a lot of my friends said, you really need to start writing, because not just what you knew with him, but what you know from your own work and your own experiences. And it took them a long time to convince me to do it. So when I wrote that book, I had no idea how to write a book. I read a lot, so I thought, well, I'll just kind of write like other writers do. And it actually turned out pretty well. It's sort of a general book. It's kind of a basic book. I mean, there's really something in there for everybody. I cover from the fossil record through the history up to the original Bigfoot hunters. And then I put a little of my own experience in, and I was kind of rushed on the second half of the book. That's where I talk about evidence. So I didn't get to put as much stuff in there as I wanted to, but it didn't come out too bad. I discussed different forms of evidence and then answered questions at the end of the book.
What was the name of that book, Will?
It's called Notes from the Field, Tracking North America Sasquatch.
Oh, okay. One of I was reading some reviews on that book, actually, and a couple of reviews said that your style in that book was that it was as if you were talking to them.
Yeah, it's kind of the way I write. I mean, I didn't know. I don't like writing in a third person. If you're going to read something I write, I want to write it like I'm talking to you. Like I'm discussing something with a person. And people seem to like that approach. So I mean, it's just the way I write. So I'm glad people like that. The other two books were they're kind of little projects while I'm working on the larger book. And I sort of threw them out there. I didn't really do a whole lot with them. One was called Haunted Valley. It's about a 9-month investigation we did in southwest Washington State where this group of creatures focused on one farm for a period of 9 months. And it was a very interesting, that had the ground in that area been a little bit different, it was very thickly covered with grass and forest, not very conducive for tracks. We did find tracks a number of times, but it could very well have been as important as Bluff Creek was.
Wow.
Because of the sheer number of sightings from locals in the area and even my own team members. But on nearly every night we'd hear them come screaming down from the mountain. We'd hear them run through the field. I mean, it was just many, many things that happened there. And the third book is called In Search of the Unknown, and that was actually part of a much larger book that I didn't like the way it came out, so I broke it up a little bit. And that particular book it just covers my entry. So many people ask me how I got involved in the issue, so I thought, well, I'll go ahead and write it. And then some of the other things we did after meeting Green and DeHinden, some experiences we had. It's just very inexpensive, kind of fun little books. Like I said, I put them out just to sort of just to put them out, kind of experimenting with different things. I read things that different authors write about, for entertaining audiences, and I thought, well, okay, I'll try some of these things. But the new book that's going to be coming out, I don't know exactly when I'm going to be done with it yet, because these projects sort of take on a life of their own, and this one is going to be a very major work, and I think it's going to have a huge impact on the subject. So I'm hoping this year it'll be out.
Jeff from the chat room had a question. He wants to know, how long do you think they live? Do you know if they have a lifespan?
It's hard to gauge that, but I imagine it's probably, I'm going to say probably around 60 years average, because the same ones have been seen in some areas, for quite a number of decades like that.
Is that, your estimate of 60 years, is that based on an individual who is single or who has a mate?
I don't know. maybe longer if they're single. I don't know. Oh, that's my experience. Oh, I'm sorry.
You better be quiet. I hope you're in a private room.
Yeah. I know. I'm always in trouble, so.
Join the crowd, Will. Join the crowd.
Yeah, I know. She tells me Trouble is my middle name, so.
Well, I advertised wrong. It should have been William Trouble Jevning.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, man. Well, I tell you what, Abe is full of questions tonight. He wants to know if you ever try to communicate with him, and if you do, does it work?
Hey, Billy, that's not the only thing Abe is full of.
A friend of mine that I mentioned earlier, his name was Carlo Sposito in Portland, Oregon, he was heavily involved in the cattle mutilation issue, and read a newspaper article about the sighting that we had in southern Washington in 1988. So he and I met, got to be friends, and he'd had a couple of experiences near Mount Rainier with Sasquatches himself. So his thing was, my early training was archaeology and anthropology, and his was sociology. So his thoughts were that we carry sweet potatoes in our pockets, and if we happen to encounter one, to try to, go into a submissive position, where the head's down. And Indian friends have said the same thing. Don't look at them in the eyes. But which is probably smart. You don't do that with gorillas either. Otherwise, they turn you into a pretzel. But and I had no desire to be a pretzel. So we tried that for a while, but we never ran into one to try it. And then as more I researched more, read a lot more accounts, and I've read thousands of accounts. I don't think it would work trying to communicate with one. I mean, they're kind of ill-tempered anyway. So, like the two that I saw the first time, they weren't happy campers about my being there. So, I think the last thing they want to do is communicate. They might have, wrapped me around a tree rather than talk to me. But no, I wouldn't recommend that.
Okay. And Digger Dog wants to know, do you have any good, interesting new reports as of late?
Let me think. I get stuff once in a while. Of course, you guys, do you know about the things that have happened recently with Wes Germer and his brother in southern Washington?
Oh, let's hear about it.
Well, Wes and Woody are a couple of great guys. They live near the area that I worked for about 12 years, south of Mount St. Helens. And they had an encounter with the same group that I investigated, the same one that I wrote about with the Goldammer farm in 1989-90, about a year ago. And they were up in that area one evening and had 4 or 5 of these individuals circling them very close. And they were very aggressive. These things weren't trying to hide. They were almost trying to provoke them.
Oh.
And they basically got out of there by the skin of their teeth. And these guys are, they're straight shooters. They're very, very honest. And with talking back and forth, they were able to follow up and find things that I told them that I saw there. And it had been 23 years since these creatures had come back to that area, but they're back there, and they're not a friendly bunch. So that was an interesting one. But, once in a while we get some stuff like that. And I don't know what's currently going on there. I haven't heard too much recently from them, but I told them about a few places to take a look at and some of the behaviors they were doing back then. So I'm hoping they'll get in touch with me and with some new things.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Wow, that's cool.
Go ahead, Bruce, ask your next question.
Well, what is your next big, expedition? I know that you've been doing a lot of work here and there, but do you have sort of a big project that you're working on?
I've got several. Yeah, I've got several places along the coast here that I really want to get out to this year, and I really have a short time frame because in the mountains on the west coast here, you can only get in there really during the summer months because snow hits and it's just impossible to get in a lot of places. And then in the spring, there's so many windfalls. The trees are down everywhere, and the Forest Service doesn't clear them until the end of June a lot of times. So there's a couple of places here in Northern California I want to look at, and 2 in Washington, 1 in Oregon. So I got kind of a busy schedule if I can get to it, but I have a pretty full plate this year, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
No, when you go out, do you go out for just a couple of days? Do you go out for the day? Do a night op? I mean, how do you structure your research?
It kind of depends on what I'm looking for. Now, if I know they're in an area, I'll work both day and night. And nighttime, I don't like a lot of people go out with you see them like they did on the show. The guys are out with their lights and a bonfire and their cameras and stuff. They're hunting a lot at night. So, and that's one of the things. They're an ambush predator, so they're not just going to be out bumbling around the forest. They're waiting. For it. It's sort of there's a formula to survival. Where you need to have more energy intake than expenditure. And the Sasquatch is a big creature. It takes a lot of energy, and Indians even say they are constantly looking for food and eating. So deer is a primary food. They get a lot of energy from that. So they're waiting near game trails and places like that for a meal to come along. And I was able to prove that a couple of years back. I have a place that I call Area Number 4, and I find a lot of their droppings in that area. Bob Titten has told me what to look for in this area, and I went there and was able to verify what he told me. And we went to a creek that was in one section of this area, and we weren't finding any droppings along the creek. And I told my brother-in-law it was kind of weird. We were finding them all over the place on the ridge above. And I thought, well, if you were something like that and you were trying to conserve energy, and especially if it were hot, what would you do? And I thought about big cats. Well, big cats will lay in ambush and wait. And when a meal comes along, they have a quick burst of energy. Then I went back and looked through a number of the stories where these things had taken deer, right in a hunter's rifle sights, snatch the deer up. And I know several of those kinds of stories. And I thought, I'll take a look in the tree line, and sure enough, we found all these droppings within the first 20 feet of the tree line. So it really verified what I was thinking about their behaviors in terms of hunting. So if I know they're in an area by their signs, whether they're marking territory or their droppings, and usually find both together, I'll go in the daytime and see where they're hunting and leave them alone at night. Let them do what they do at night. Because and I've found over the years, if you mess with their behaviors, it'll scare them away. They'll leave the area. So at night, I recommend to people, let them do what they do. You can go and listen for them scream, do whatever they do at night, but don't interfere with them. In fact, a funny story was when this group was in Yakult in 1989, my team members were at the house before I arrived this one evening, and they were standing there talking quietly, and I pulled up and parked, and we were just talking very quietly and waiting for these screams to start on the mountain above us. And another car come driving up the road, and we thought it was another one of our people. Well, here was this blue Porsche pulled up, and a man and a woman get out, and we introduced ourselves, and the guy just says, well, I'm a biologist from Seattle. And they were putting backpacks on, and they said, we're going up the ridge. And I said, I wouldn't do that. Oh, well, we know what we're doing. I'm going to go do this. So they hopped over the barbed wire fence, and up they went. And I looked at my friends, and I said, they'll be back. And we continued chatting quietly. And we always have lights off. We don't, like I said, we don't try to be obtrusive at all. Be very quiet, be very unnoticeable, and let them do what they do. Well, we see these flashlights come bobbing down the hill really fast. And the barbed wire fence is about 5 feet high. And these two come running through the timber down the hill. They threw their backpacks over the fence, almost killed themselves trying to get over the wire, jumped in the Porsche. The woman's hanging out the side while the guy's trying to drive away in a hurry. And we're standing there with our mouths hanging open. And my friend Don says, well, that was quicker than we thought. It was the funniest thing I ever saw. It scared the living hell out of these two. And I told them, don't go up there. They're coming down this ridge. Leave them alone.
Well, we have a question from the chat room.
Sure.
Buckeye Squatcher asked, can you elaborate on the rock stacking investigation explained in Notes from the Field? Your interpretation?
Well, it's funny. That's something that John Green first put in either his first or second book back in 1968 or 72, which I can't remember which one of those books it was in, but he just sort of at the end of the book, and he had a picture of his son sticking out of the hole the Sasquatch dug, and a couple of rock stacks, and he says, well, if you find rock stacks, then maybe Sasquatches are there. And Renee came to visit one time. We used to visit each other's homes a couple times each year, and besides phone calls and letters. And on one of his trips coming back from California, and I don't remember what year it was, late 80s sometime, he wanted us to meet him in Oregon where Green had taken these pictures. And I asked him, I said, Renee, what's with those stacks? And he says, if you want to see them, I'll take you up there and show you. They're still up there. So we drove to where this site was, and it was too dark to see him. And he says, well, now you know how to get here. He says, go there and look. Tell me what you think. So he drives away and goes home. And my friend Carlo and we came back the next day and looked, and it was amazing. The story was there was a logger, and this happened also in 1967, same year as the Patterson film. In fact, right about the same month even. A couple of guys were going up to work one day, and the skidder operator didn't need the other guy's help, so he went for a walk. And he come across 2 adult Sasquatches and a very young one, and they were turning rocks over, smelling them, he said. And then they would stack the rocks. And then suddenly the big male jumps on this area and starts pulling rocks out like crazy. And these are big rocks. They're not little ones. Big granite rocks. 200-300 pounds, some of them. And supposedly it pulled up a bunch of grass with some rodents. They ate the rodents. Then they spotted the logger and took off. Well, the hole was still there. And it's 6 feet across, 6 feet deep. and these rock stacks were all over it. And I called Renee and asked him about it, and he says, well, I'll tell you how to find other sites like that. Well, he knew of about 7 other sites in the region, and he told me how to find them. And they're not easy to locate there. You got to go cross country on foot, and take some doing to locate them. So they're not something that somebody manufactured for people to find. And I've since found other sites in other states, and I'm not quite sure what they mean. They could be, there could be dead ones buried in these areas, but I don't know yet. I mean, it's on my list of to-do things. And I don't think they're under the stacks, and I can't elaborate just yet on what I'm looking for, because I don't want people running out looking all over for these things, and wrecking them, because I'm still trying to sort of put the whole picture of it together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Jeff wanted to know how many individuals do you think is in a family group, or do you know?
They average 4 to 6.
Okay.
And that's based on a number of groups where I know they live.
Okay.
That seems to be pretty consistent, 4 to 6.
Okay.
And Will, these family groups, are they just sort of nuclear families, or do they have extended families? How's the social structure?
Well, I'll give you an example. For in the Yacold area, we had 4 of them at that time, and I still think that group numbers about 4. We found tracks of 2 young ones, and there were 2 adults, an older female and a young adult male. So I don't know if that's, was the mother, or if that was a breeding pair. The 2 young ones had 9 and 12-inch tracks, so they weren't young, but they weren't, near adulthood yet either.
And how did you know those one set of tracks belonged to an older female?
What was that? I'm sorry.
How did you know that one set of tracks belonged to an older female?
Oh, because the family saw the female. Well, they saw the male, and this was kind of interesting. What some investigators look for. When I saw the article about the show, or about this incident, it was already several days after it happened, and it was on the front page of the Vancouver newspaper in Washington. And I thought, well, I'll go out there and talk to the people anyway. I'm sure a bunch of people have already been there and probably trampled all over the site. So I went and talked to the family, and they really liked the fact that I was the only person that came there that had actually seen a Sasquatch myself. So as we talked about it, they said, well, yeah, everybody came here. They were looking for either tracks, hair, poop, collect the story, and then they left. And the story was that the Sasquatch, well, they heard the horse making noise. So the mother of the house asked her 16-year-old son to go out and take a look. The horse was tied in the corral, and she was going to go riding apparently shortly after this, so she tied the horse up. And she says, make sure that the horse doesn't have the rope tied up in its hoofs. So he went out there, and at first he thought it was somebody walking down their fields. And the houses are quite a bit of distance between them there, so it's not likely somebody would have been walking on their fields, but he thought it was a person, so he went running after this person to ask him what they were doing on their property. And as he got close, he saw that it wasn't a person. He slipped on a tree branch and fell, making a bunch of noise, and the creature turned around, and he said it kind of reared back with its head, and its eyes got big as if surprised. And he said it sort of leaned forward as if to get a better look at him, and then it spread its hands out 45 degrees from its body, palms facing, and come walking after him like it was hurting him. He gets up, he runs back to the house, changes his boots so he has a better grip, and in the meantime the creature turned around and gone back on its merry way. Well, when it heard him coming again, this time it come running after him, and he climbed up on an outbuilding, and it stood there for a while to watch him to make sure he wasn't going to come after it again. And finally it resumed the same course down the field. And I said, did anybody go down there and look where it went? And they said, no, nobody was interested. I said, do you mind if I go? They said, sure, we'll take you down there. So we crossed a small creek in the lower fields. This was probably 10 acres or so. We started up the next pasture, and there was a big cottonwood tree that had fallen over. And under the base of that was a dried pool of water. And we found footprints all over of these 2 young ones in this concealed position. So I said, okay, we have 2 young ones. We know there's a young adult male. I said, keep your eyes open. You might see a female here. And about a month later, I get a call at 11 o'clock at night. I'm in bed sleeping. And I said, Will, you got to get out here. We see the female. It's standing out in our yard right now under the bright outdoor lights. And he said, it's gray. They gave me a real detailed description. And I jumped, put threw my jeans on and went driving out there. And sure enough, there were 16-inch tracks around the yard. And we saw their eyeballs out in the field.
I hate to interrupt your story, Will. We are going to go into archive any second now, right,
okay.
Billy?
Yeah, we're already in the archive.
Oh, we are. Okay.
Yeah, I already kind of let everybody know in the chat room, but they'll figure it out. They'll figure it out online real quick. But no, we can keep going, so it's not a problem. As long as Will's got time, then we're fine.
Yeah, it's
sure.
a pretty interesting story. If I were that kid, I probably would have changed more than my boots.
There was the number of incidents that happened there were amazing. There was a couple weeks after the initial one. They had a 16 or a 15-year-old daughter, and her girlfriend was over there watching movies. The family was all out on the town that night except for the 2 girls, and they wanted to go give the horse some grain. And this was about 10 o'clock at night, and they have a lot of porch lights, the big outdoor lights of the farm, so everything's well lit. And they go out to the barn, get some grain, and what they think is the horse isn't the horse. They see what they at first thought was a man, again, this outline coming up through the tall field grass, and then they see it's not a man. They scream and run like hell to the house, and this thing is right behind them. They about tore the screen door off the hinges, and the top hinge was torn completely out of the framework. And it stood there looking at him through the window. They said it had kind of a stupid look on its face, and the only thing they could think to do was grab pots and pans and bang them together and scream and make a lot of noise. And they said finally it got kind of a bored look on its face, and it walked off in the darkness. They called me, and I went out the next day, and sure enough, all the evidence was there, and the screen door was tore up, and but these kind of things happened. They had a 4-year-old son, and little one I think was 3, and the 4-year-old, or was he 6? He was either 4 or 6. I don't remember anymore, but he was a little kid, and my friend Carol Seamany, she was talking to the mother and the little boys, and little John, the little boy, he says, "Did you see the big monkey and these 2 boys playing in the field?" And up at this point, the little kids had not heard us talk. They were never around when we were talking. And he said, I saw the big monkey and these 2 boys, and that fit exactly with what we found. So there was just a whole series of really interesting things that came out of that.
Oh yeah, that was a cool story. Donna asked me earlier. She goes, "Darn, what's the end of that story?" I said, "You have to listen to archives." It happens. An hour flies by when you're having fun.
Yeah, that does go by quickly.
But that keeps them wanting more, so that's the way you got to do it.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Well, I'm sure Will's got like a ton of stories. So Will be a great guy to sit around the campfire with, wouldn't you say, Billy?
Yeah, I would think so.
I've had people tell me that.
And you squatching me actually had a good question that I never really thought about. I don't know if you saw it, Bruce. He was asking. He goes, do you think those Bigfoot structures are for the Bigfoot hunting their meal?
I've never seen anything like that out in the wild, so I don't really know what to think of those. Now, where some of the people are sending me this stuff, there is another variety of these things that are a little more human-like, that aren't. Everybody throws all of these things under one umbrella, and they call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch.
Right.
And really, the Sasquatch is what's here in the Pacific Northwest Mountains. When you go a little farther east, I think, and you know what the Minnesota Iceman was, right?
Yes.
Well, I think the Iceman is one of the other of the two large varieties. It's kind of the same thing the Russians have, you know, with their Kaptar and Almas and all that. Could very well be, you know, the remnant Neanderthals. I mean, they don't know if Neanderthals were hairless or completely covered with hair. They really don't know that.
Right.
And it could be that if that's what this other variety that people are calling a Bigfoot but isn't a Bigfoot could very well be doing something like that. You know, where the Sasquatch is pretty unsophisticated. They don't really, they mangle trees, and I've got some pretty good examples of what they do with trees, but they don't really build anything, I mean, other than like the rock stacking. They're pretty simple, really.
I tell you what, though, Will, I've got a few interesting, I don't know what you want to call them, stick structures, tree structures. I don't know what you want to call them. I do have a few elaborate ones that, you know, if I walk on a trail, some type of a main trail, I don't really put too much credence in a structure.
Right.
But when I'm out walking in an area that's you know, that I'm just relying on my GPS to get from one point A to point B, and I'm not following a trail, and I find something like that, I look at it a little harder.
It's a little different when it's way off trail somewhere. But I'm really, you know, originally, you know, the old timers, the original pioneers, they all thought they were talking about different species when they were talking about some of these different things. And then later, Renee told me, he says, well, maybe it was just a communication difference. But I'm sort of the mind now that they really were talking about some different creatures. You know, they were still man-like, they're hairy, they're big, but they're not the same things. There's a couple different species.
Right.
And I tend to think that one is much more intelligent, maybe a little closer to human, and the other one's not. The other one's, you know, they're like I said, you know, a lot more unsophisticated. They're more animal-like.
I tell you, speaking of strange, this just popped into my mind. We were actually going to a job today here in Virginia, and you know, we only live about 30 miles from Washington D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And we're traveling up a well-traveled road, which is called Route 15, which goes through Prince William County, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very close to, you know, hundreds of thousands of people in population in this area.
Right.
And on the side of the road is a bear.
Good Lord.
I mean, people, you know, it's just amazing to me. You know, obviously it got hit by a car. It was laying on the side of the road. It wasn't an old bear. It looked like a, you know, fairly young black bear. But you know, it's just amazing. You know, people, you know, it's when you see something like that in a populated area right outside of Washington D.C., you know, it just kind of makes you say, wow, you know, this stuff is like right under our nose.
Yeah, and it's funny, you know, I did another TV show. I'm not sure when it's going to be airing yet, but it's Joe Rogan is the host. He's the guy who did Fear Factor.
Mm-hmm.
And before we came on the show, we were talking about, you know, dealing with producers and production crews and such, and they were a tough crew. The History Channel people were great. Joe Rogan's a tough interviewer, and he was telling me he'd been all over the place interviewing different Bigfoot hunters, and he said he thought most of them were basically full of crap. But he really liked me. He told me he had numerous times. He says, you know, if I was the president tomorrow, I'd put together a department to go out and find Bigfoot. And he says, you're the guy that would run it. So I felt, you know, considering the way he was talking about all these other people, I felt pretty good about that. But he was asking a lot of really tough questions, and then when he was telling me about going to the Northwest, he'd never been to Washington State before, and he says, my God, the same thing you guys did, that those areas are giant. He says,
mm-hmm.
how do you look for them in these areas?
Right.
And I said, well, how do you think I've been doing this for 40 years?
And you still ain't covered it all.
That's right, still ain't covered it all.
Well, Joe Rogan, he's from Massachusetts, and he's a tough individual. He was like a kickboxing champion or something
He was
like that.
a UFC fighter, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, was he? Yeah, UFC fighting.
Tough guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he is a tough guy.
We were filming down in there's a lot more rugged mountains just outside of Los Angeles than I ever thought was down there. And they wanted to, and it was funny. I was wearing a tweed jacket and a tie, and totally inappropriately dressed for where they wanted to film us. But the producers told me what to wear, so we took a little hike down this trail through the woods to where they wanted to film. And when we all left, the rest of us took the trail up. He went cross country. Well, there's a lot of rattlesnakes in this area, so I was thinking, man, I wouldn't go up through that stuff. Yeah, he's a tough dude, that guy.
Yeah, he is.
Nice guy if he likes you, but I'd hate to be on the receiving end of of somebody that he didn't like.
Oh yeah, it wouldn't be pleasant. Well, do you have any more questions, Bruce?
I have a jillion more questions, Billy, but we are kind of getting low on time here. But I think we should definitely have Will back on the show, just because he's just got so many interesting stories, and an hour is really not long enough to talk to Will.
That's what other people say. They always have to extend the time when I'm going to be a guest. So, but yeah, any time you'd like me on, just let me know. And
okay, William.
Not a problem.
We really appreciate it. We really do. And keep up the good work out there.
Well,
and
thanks for having me on.
So you say you are coming up on another program, or?
Yeah, it's Joe Rogan Questions Everything is the name of the show, and I don't know when it's going to be on or anything yet, but
okay.
Yeah, that's the name of it. It's a sci-fi production.
Cool. I'll have to be watching out for that.
I'll put the information on Facebook when it's going to, and I'll send you an email too when I know ahead of time.
Oh, that'll be great. Well, Will, thank you so much for being on the show. We greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day, and you can thank your wife also for letting us have time with you. So,
well, I appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Well,
thanks
for coming on.
All right. Thanks a lot, Will. Thank you, Bruce, for helping out tonight.
My pleasure. And, Will, it's a pleasure meeting you, and, I love your stories. I'd love to hear more of them.
Oh, you bet. Anytime.
All right. Everyone tune back in next Tuesday night, 9 p.m. This weekend, I will put out an advertisement of who we'll have on the show. So we'll see you next Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Sasquatch Watch Radio. Remember to join us again next Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. We appreciate every one of our listeners. Thank you so much for being here.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.